Well, not really, but it's recording.
Yeah, I'm recording too. Cool.
Sweet. Well, as I was saying, I'm really excited. I think this will be fun because we haven't really talked about this yet since we've finished.
Right. Yeah. I feel like there's much to discuss about this album.
Yeah, because the thing for me. Well, first, the album's called "Be in Peace."
Be in
One.
peace. Bip.
BIP. Yes, that is the title track. It should be out when this is released. It should be out. So we'll have all the links in the description, streaming links, Spotify. Um, it'll be on Bandcamp as well. So we'll have those in the description. And so, yeah, we'll release this when it comes out. So this will be. I'm excited because I think the thing for me is like I feel like as someone who wrote the music, but then you mixed it. I'm really curious about your experience with it because
Hmm.
I feel like we both had kind of a similar experience, but probably in different ways
Right. Yeah.
because the perspective that we both had on it.
Yeah. Because I mean, all of the tracks in here are your baby. You've been working on this for far longer than I have.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Of course, the initial conception of it all, but then like the mixing process, we were both in that through the thick of it.
Yeah, I think
Those.
all right, and that's one thing I want to talk about is because we okay, so it was this past fall. I called you and I was like, okay, we're gonna do this thing. I got a handful of these tunes. It's time to stop making excuses and just do the things that we dream about when we're playing PS4,
You know,
right?
if I may, I wanted to ask about that.
Okay,
Because like I know that was the whole thing behind this. You wanted to just put something out there, right? That was kind of your
absolutely.
driving force behind this. But I wanted to know like was there a moment or something that inspired you and you were just like, screw it, I'm making an album and you're like,
Yeah.
now what's happening?
So, okay. So back to the PS4 thing. All right, so here's the thing. So, I as you know, like I graduated college last year right when COVID was starting.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. So I was in class of 2020 and I was never able to say bye to my friends, which sucked. It's one of those things that like when it's happening, you're just like, hold on a second. I can't say bye to all these people that I like
Right.
formed these relationships with. So I went on like this little journey of like, I was working on live music at the time and then live music wasn't happening. So it's like, what's the point of writing it? Like, what's the point of writing ensemble music if it's not going to be performed for a while?
Mm. Yeah.
At least for me, I just didn't see a purpose in it. So I just started, I'm a huge fan of synthesizers, buttons and knobs and all that stuff. So this is kind of like the prequel to the answer of your question. So I was already working on this music, just doing production and recording and synthesizers and processing and all that kind of fun stuff, like that just wonderland of stuff. It's really fun.
Yeah.
And so I was in a class last semester, like my first semester of grad school. I was in a class, and in that class, it was fun. It was electronic class, and the assignments where we would talk about, early electronic music, like stuff like music concrete, processing all that stuff. And the assignments were literally go and write a song, which is great. Like there weren't really any rules. It's just like, okay, add a few of these things to make sure you are doing something for the assignment, and then do whatever you want. So we would have these classes when the projects were done where we would just listen to them and give feedback, which is great because you never know how someone else is going to hear your work. And in during one of those classes, the professor made a remark. It's just like a general remark about, it was like it's time to get the band camp started. You know what I'm saying? And there was a moment when that happened, and I was just like, you know what? Why not?
Huh.
Like because I was getting to this point where I like just this happened just recently. I was getting to this point where I had songs and things that I was actually really excited about and really proud of, and not just like, oh, I could do that better, but like these moments where it's like, oh, these are actually not bad, and I actually really like these, and I kind of want to share them, which is the first time that ever happened. So that happened, and then I called you because the night before we were on PS4 playing whatever we were playing. We were like, "Oh, I can't wait till one day, we have this opportunity and we'll have this project going, and then I'll call you up for this, and then vice versa." And that's when I was like, "You know what? We're not gonna do those things until we start doing it." So I was like, I have a handful of these tunes, like these tunes I've written over the course of about a bit of a year during COVID and a little bit before. And I was like, let's just put something together. Let's do it. Because I don't know about you, but I know for me, I realized that I was constantly making excuses as to why what I had wasn't supposed to be the first thing. And it happened on a lot of things. I was like, "Oh, I have an idea up here of what I want things to look like for projects and albums and things." But it's like sometimes what you're thinking is more might be more the destination, not the beginning.
Hmm.
So I had this moment where I was like, I have stuff that I'm proud of. I put a lot of work into it, and I have friends that I really want to work with and that are really good at what they do. So it's like, why don't we just start doing it and just practice? Because if you want to get good at it, you got to do it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, man. It's like that pitfall as an artist that you can fall into where
Dude, it's crazy.
you're constantly trying to perfect that thing that you want to release and then it never gets released. And I feel like that's something that you and I have both been figuring out through this whole process is, that is part of the process. That is part of how to continue to
Yeah.
grow is to put stuff out there. That is part of the practice, in
Mhm.
order to get to that thing, whatever that concept is in your head of like, I
Yeah.
want to put this thing out there. I want this great quality thing. You have to put stuff out to begin with. And
Yeah.
honestly, that thing, that great thing, probably doesn't even exist. Like
Mhm.
it's more of just an overarching career of stuff that you're gonna do that you're gonna be proud of.
Absolutely. I think the other thing, and this was kind of the thing that I was having trouble with, because I feel like sometimes people struggle with this thing where it's like the releasing of the music is the most important thing. It's like, oh, the content doesn't matter, which
Mm.
I think you have to find that medium ground because I'm definitely one of those people who like will work on something for so long and polish it and polish it and polish it till like it's in this place that I'm happy. And then I'll never do anything with it because you can keep tweaking something forever, right? I mean, you can keep editing a song or adding stuff and then it'll never be finished. But yeah, I was just at this point where it was like it's time to take it's like if you're spending a lot of time on like the actual details and the artistry of it, that's great. But if your confidence is kind of low with it comes to the music, it's like all you have to kind of do is just bump that confidence up a little bit, even if it's still under how much time you spent on it, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
It's like you just have to take that step of putting it out. And if you spend a lot of time on it and you're really meticulous with it and really picky, that should give you a bit of, confidence in that this might do, you might have something pretty decent because you spent so much time on it.
Interesting.
So that's the thing for me that I was like, maybe I should just take this stuff I've spent so much time with and just put it out and stop worrying about it. Because then you can move on and do something else.
It's interesting you bring up the whole thing about being picky and spending a lot of time on it and stuff. I feel like as we were working on this project, I noticed a tone shift with you. And I don't know
Interesting.
when that was. I
Okay.
don't think that I can really pinpoint it, but I wanted to ask you about it. I feel like in the beginning of the process, you were a little bit more meticulous and picky and honestly kind of stressed in a way. And
Mm,
I don't want to say stressed, maybe that's not the
yeah.
best word for it, but like there was this kind of like undertone of like, oh crap, I'm putting out an album, right?
Yeah.
And then as we got further along in the mixes, and especially as we went back to school, I started to notice a tone shift and that you were a little more loose with things and you were starting to be like, all right, we need to get this thing out there, right? And like you said just now, you're saying you can pick it apart forever and make
Yeah.
tweaks and stuff. And then eventually, you get to the point where you're like, we just need to put it out there, right? We just need to go for it. So again, wondering if there was anything that influenced your tone shift there, or if you noticed it, or what's going on there.
Yeah. That's a good point. That's interesting you notice that because so when I look back, I would say, so before this project, I was definitely when it came to things, I was definitely very uptight. I would kind of have this thing when I would sit down to work on stuff, I'd get really stressed and get really worried and be like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want this to suck."
Hmm.
Right? Which is a very common thing I think to think. It's like when you're working on it, it's kind of scary because you're taking a risk. You're like, this thing might not be good. But at the same time, it's like that's kind of the excitement of it because you have to be in that space of allowing yourself to take risks because if you do that, you free yourself up. So I had this moment when we first started working on it because this was like the first time I've ever like had, I don't know, it's 7 tracks. First time I've had this longer work and I have to put it together, which was super exciting, but I didn't know what to expect. And it was the first time I've ever worked with someone else, that is yourself, on going through and mixing it because throughout that process, the music changes quite a bit, which is exciting. But I had this moment about halfway through, like you were saying, where I was like, the music, I just had this moment where I was like, I just kind of have to trust myself. And not only trust myself, but I had to trust you, which not that I didn't trust you, but I just had this moment where I was like, why am I worrying so much? The work has already been done. It's already there. Now it's just time to have fun and do this. And then there was a part of me at the same time that I'm in this class right now where it's like we're talking about how to free up our mind a little bit when it comes to all the craziness, especially when it comes to creativity. And I just had this moment where I was like, we've spent so much time on this thing, both pre-mixing for the actual writing of it and then the mixing process. And it's like, what's the point of worrying about it? It's time to just do it and have fun. And I just was like, I need to just enjoy the process because there was a part of me that like wasn't necessarily enjoying it. It's like, okay, I got to do this because this is what I want to do. But the moment that I was just like this, like put my hands up and surrender, I was like, let's just make something fun and cool that we're proud of. I don't know. It was kind of a freeing thing to just kind of say, okay, we're just gonna put this thing out and not say like to not be worried about the result, but to just go, we're just gonna make something that we're excited about and then just put it out there
Hmm.
and just see where it goes. So that was the other thing about the project, which was like we talked about really early on. This was really like a learning experience because again, we're always talking about one day we want to work on these bigger things, but you can't work on the big project until you work on the small ones. So that was kind of the thing. So definitely throughout this process, I definitely loosened up quite a bit in terms of like, instead of having a tight fist, I kind of opened my hand up a little bit, like as a little bit of a metaphor. But with that being said, one thing I want to ask you is, let me see what question I want to ask you because a couple that would relate to that. Okay, I'll ask you this. I wanted to ask, kind of on that same note, you as someone who came in kind of after the actual music was finished, someone who jumps onto the project, I would almost say kind of halfway through. I kind of think half of the project is the writing, and then you have like the post production stuff, which is super important, right? Which can like sometimes make or break what you're doing.
Mhm.
And I wanted to ask, did you have any big takeaways or big lessons, however you want to think of it? Um, any big takeaways or lessons that you had from going into this project or after working? Well, any any big takeaways after you finished the project, if that makes sense? Did you have any moments where you're like, "Oh, okay, I got it." You know what I mean?
I think one thing that really stands out to me is just the ability to spend some time on this, right? And to
Mm,
accept that it takes time. Um, that's been really interesting because you know how frustrated I was getting with Steep, especially with those drums. Like, I couldn't get them right,
yeah, that's
you
a
know?
question I have for you later, by the way. So keep that
Yeah.
in mind.
Yeah. Like, I couldn't get them right. And I was getting frustrated, not because I wasn't getting them right, but because I wasn't getting them right away.
Yeah.
Right, that was my problem, like, "Why am I not getting this right now? I've been studying mixing for, like, 5 months," which is, like, nothing in the grand scheme of things, right?
Mm,
So, just really accepting and being thankful for the luxury that we do have time, right? Because we set our own deadline. It got to that point, we were like, "Alright, we need to end this, we need to put a deadline on this," and we chose a date. But for a while there, it was just kinda like, "Yeah, we're working on this," right? We didn't have any kind of a deadline, we didn't have any constraints, so it was kind of a luxury in that sense that we really could spend a lot of time on this and that was
yeah.
fine, and that's just something that I struggle with overall is just being patient with myself and with the process. So I think
Mhm.
this helped to solidify that it's important to be patient.
Yeah, I remember, it's funny, I remember, like, really early on we were doing it. It was, what was it, like, we started, last December?
Yep.
'Cause we spent about, 3 to 4 months on it? Not, like, every day, but, like, a couple times a week.
Yeah.
Cause I remember that was one conversation we had. Like, for me, I've kinda learned when it comes to, I guess, more on the composition side, it's like, you kinda have to let the material, like, you find your material, then you kinda have to let the piece unfold as it wants to,
Hmm.
right? Kinda like having this patience, which is something I've been practicing for the past couple months. And I know we've talked about that a little bit throughout the process, because there were definitely some moments that you're right, took some time to kinda get right. Took a few iterations. So, what was the thing that allowed you to loosen up? So when you're working on the drums, I remember one time in particular, we were trying to do the drums, and you were getting a little bit upset. I remember that,
A little
which wa
bit.
yeah. And I was curious, was there a moment when you were just like, "Okay, I mean, I just kinda have to let this unfold as it is?" Kinda what was the thing that allowed you to get through that?
First thing I did was take a long break from that piece. And I worked on other things. I worked on schoolwork. I worked on other tracks for the album. Anything but Steep.
Mm, yeah.
I also brought it to my professor and was like, "What am I doing wrong? Why do these drums sound like crap? Right? Like, what am I doing wrong?" And basically everything I had done to them, he was like, "Get rid of it." Like we went
Dang.
through the whole processing chain, and it was just like little by little we realized, "Oh man, I was making this worse." And so, we went through that, and I just started fresh after a good long break and after talking to my professor about it, and you and I got back together and just coming at it with a different mindset of like, "Okay, maybe I need to do less to this," or,
Mm,
just trying to think differently and starting fresh. Then, we found something that worked better. And I guess in once that happened, once it clicked and it was like, "Okay, cool. These sound a lot better." That kinda solidified for me the whole patience thing again, just like, "Alright, it's fine. Just cool off. Don't let your anger get to you. Start over if needed," just yeah, because I feel like I was trying to make it work with everything had already done to it, which was, as we now know, was making it worse. But, like, I just kept trying to drill further down that rabbit hole. Like, I kept trying to add stuff to it. I kept trying to do more things to it in the same vein that I was already doing to it.
mm.
And so I think stepping back and realizing, okay, this isn't working, and trying something else, which is like, duh. But in that moment, it's weird. Like it just, I thought I was trying other things by continuing to do stuff to it.
It's interesting. That's so funny because I've had many conversations with my professors and things about I just know that sometimes I have these moments where like I sit down to work on stuff. Like I'll sit down for the day and I'm like, okay, I'm gonna write. And you sit there for hours and you just don't got anything. And it's an aggravating experience. You're like, what is wrong with me? What is happening? But I think sometimes you have to allow yourself that space and patience. Because I kind of think about creating as like baking. You know,
Hmm.
sometimes you gotta put it in the oven, you gotta have the stove on the right temperature, but if you don't have it on the right temperature and you wanna speed it up, and you turn up the temperature a bit, what's gonna happen? The insides aren't gonna be baked, the outside might be burned a bit, so it's like it's this really weird thing where we're always trying to get to the end as fast as possible, but it's like sometimes that space is what the piece needs, and it's like if you speed it up, you might the piece might suffer because of it. So I think for me, watching that happen through the mixing process was really interesting because I could relate to it,
Hmm.
which is so funny because with the writing and the mixing, it's almost like a very similar. It's like we had the same issues, but like in a different way. It's really, really interesting. So with that being said, my other question, now that it's all finished, are there any mixes on the album that you were the most proud of? Like when you listen back to this when when it's out, which it'll be out when this is posted, or maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, what's like a mix that that you think you'll look back and go like, "Yeah, I really still like that one," or, you know, or even now, what's one that you're really happy with?
I really hope that in 10 years, I'm still gonna like Bud. I'm very
But
I'm
yes.
very happy with that one because that was one of the first ones you'd sent me, and I had that whole concept about the mono to stereo
Oh,
thing that
yeah,
never
I
worked
forgot
out,
about that.
or where like the first half of it was in mono and then it would blow up in stereo at the end, and that's not quite what happens now. It does go to mono like right before it blows up, air quotes blows up, right? The
Yeah.
thermal imploder, right?
Oh, heck
But
yes.
yeah, I'm pretty happy with that mix. But one thing that I know in like, 10, 20 years when we look back on this album after long successful careers, in 10 years we'll have very successful
Yeah.
careers, I'm sure. But
Yeah, of course, because it happens that fast.
yeah, but the point is like, when I'm older, um and then I look back on this album that we made, and I think the end of Doves, the
Oh,
you labeled it
yeah.
"That's Cool," the track,
That's cool.
I think that's gonna get me. That's gonna get me, Grayson,
Yeah.
cause it's so I feel like of everything in that album, that is the most us thing because well, it literally is, right? I was looping that part of the match in the beginning, and it just had this rhythm to it. We were like, "Oh, that's cool," and he started playing piano, and I recorded it, right? That was just, like, such a honest moment between the 2 of us that I'm really happy you put in the album, and yeah, that moment's
Yeah.
gonna get me.
It's so interesting. I definitely think one of like, we definitely had a lot of fun
Yeah.
'cause, like, we were at home for winter break, and it was everything about it was kinda perfect timing 'cause I had that moment and I called you, I was like, "We're gonna be home in, like, a month. We're gonna work on this project." We were home till about mid-January, and really, like, yeah, we were working, working on it, and it was, like, not easy, but, like, we definitely had fun with it.
Oh, yeah.
And that was one of those moments where it's like, who would have thought that would have been on the album?
Mhm.
Because like, we didn't do that with like, "Oh, we're gonna put this at the end." That wasn't even the intention. It was just us having a good time and messing around and being like, "Oh, that's interesting. Let's put
Yeah.
some, let's have fun with that for a second."
I feel like there were a number of moments, maybe not as, obvious as that, but a number of moments where the piece definitely changed in the mixing process. Some
Mm.
moments where I was kind of a sound designer, like the, like, firework sound effect,
Oh, yeah.
crap, what was the song?
Bip.
Yes, Bip. Like that old sound, like,
Oh
I
my
I pretty
gosh,
much
man.
did sound design on that, that was pretty cool. Um, like, well, yeah, there were a number of moments like that, and then again with Bud, with the whole mono to stereo thing and the and the explosion and stuff, like, it's interesting how the pieces kind of evolved as we were mixing it.
Yeah. It was funny because as we kinda talked about, like, a lot of what I do, the mix is really important because that's also, like, the composition.
Yes.
Like, I think very much like that because I like because I'll have, like there was, like, quote, unquote, "my mix," and then I'd send it to you, and then you would mix that kinda thing because
Yeah,
I'd do all that stuff to it.
but at the same time, like, I mean, I know early on, right, I asked you to send me dry stems, like, take off all the effects, which is, like, the dumbest
Mhm.
crap ever because, like, as we were saying, like, that's part of it, right? Whatever you did to it is part of the composition. That's making the sound. So once we figured that out, that was great. But then another thing, I really didn't play with panning a whole lot in these mixes because you had set the panning, right? And I feel like this album tends to be kind of a cloud overall, right?
Mhm.
And you have things in particular places. And if I adjusted that, I don't I don't think it'd be quite the same. It's not like a rock tune where it's like, okay, I'm gonna put kick, snare, bass in the middle, and the guitar over here on the right or whatever, right? And I can make those decisions. You already made those decisions,
Mm.
and that was an interesting challenge as a mixer, because again, all the stuff I'm learning in mix class, you know, the majority of mixing is levels and panning, and then you took away panning, kind of. So I was like, okay, cool. Now I gotta figure out ways around that, and that was really interesting.
You know what's funny? Okay, so back to your earlier question about, like, halfway through the project, I kinda loosened up a little bit.
Uh huh.
It's funny because I feel like I'm definitely one of those people, and I think we've had conversations like this before. I'm definitely one of those people. When it comes to music, like my stuff, I like being in control, and like I like everything how it is, very specific. Like everything is like, okay, I want this here, this here, this here.
Hmm.
And I remember in the beginning, I was another reason I was worried to work on this at first, and I needed to do it was because, like you were saying, there's that moment where it's like, all right, now we have to go through and mix this thing. And I think a part of me was kind of worried. I was like, I hope it still sounds the same kind of thing. Like it was kind of weird, but I think we kind of figured out how to do it in a way where it kind of keeps the integrity of the original idea, but makes it way better, which was really interesting. Because going back to what you're saying about how things would shift, and you were very heavily a sound designer throughout it, was as we were mixing it, it's like things about each piece was like revealing itself.
Hmm.
And how on bit we were like, we need a firework there.
Yeah.
Just like little things like that. And then we went on this long journey of trying to figure out how to do this firework. And that's one thing I want to ask you about is because we hacked away at that one. sound for like 2 hours. I don't know
Uh-huh.
if it was 2 hours, but it
I
felt like it.
it felt like a couple days to me.
Dude, and the thing is, and I started feeling bad because it was one of those moments where you would do something and I would be sitting there laying on the floor behind you on a yoga mat. You would do something and I'm just like, "No, that's not it." You do something else, and then I'm like, "Oh, that's cool." And then I get excited, then you'll do something else and I'm like, "Ah, no, it's gone." What was that experience like? Did you get frustrated with me at all?
A little bit, but, like but it's okay because I get it, right? Like,
Uh-huh.
my job as a mixer is by nature a job of service, right? So, it's good practice for me to be like, just to work on patience, right?
Yeah.
Um, it was funny as crap looking back on it, right? Because I very clearly have an image in my head looking back at you laying on the floor on a yoga mat, just like, you were losing it, man. We both were. We were both just tired of this crap. And the best part was when we called it quits that day and we were like, "Oh, screw it, we'll come back to it later." And then we came back to it later, like it was like a week or two later, and
Yeah.
we were like, "Wait, that's perfect."
Dude, I'm telling you, that's the thing. I remember that too. We were in your basement and you listened to it and you were like, "Whoa, wait a second, that was kinda cool." And I was like, "Holy crap, we did it, and we didn't even realize it." It was kinda crazy,
Yeah.
and it was cool, and now that's my favorite part of that song,
Mhm.
that one little minute in the very beginning. I'm like, "Wow, that's really cool," and I think that's one reason why I like it because I know what went into it. And I'm sitting here laying on that yoga mat, and in my head, I'm like, "I hope he does not get mad at me because
It's okay.
I'm
I'm
just like,
not
oh, because I know how picky I
No,
can
but
be."
it's good. That's part of the art.
Yeah,
It's yeah. That was a great experience.
absolutely.
And now it's the title track.
Yeah. Yeah, it is, isn't it? That was a fun one. I'm trying to think if there were any other moments that we
The match.
Oh, yeah, the match.
That was totally spontaneous. You're like, "What if we had a match?" And I literally went upstairs and grabbed a match and lit it in front of my mic.
Yeah, we were close to the mic too.
Yeah, and it was a great sound.
That was a phenomenal sound.
And then you, like, warped it all to hell later on.
I know, I completely destroyed it.
Yeah, but, like, it's awesome, right? It sounds so cool. I hope I still have that recording somewhere, though. I should add that to my sound effects
Oh, you
collection.
should. It's really nice. I remember because I remember when alright, so we recorded that sound, you did some stuff to it. You did whatever you did to it to, like, kind of heighten it to make it sound more like a match. Because sometimes the raw sound doesn't really work.
Right.
Gotta do a little bit of work for it to, like, sound like a match, which is kind of weird.
Mhm.
So I remember you did some stuff to it, and then I remember I had my lesson. I think I told you, I had my lesson and I think one time I showed the piece to my professor during my lesson last semester, and he was like, "That's a really good sound of a match." And I'm like, "Right?"
Heck yeah.
And the best part is, like, you did so much to it to, like, heighten the reality,
Mhm.
and because it was not the raw sound at all. And I'm like, "Wow, that's really cool."
Man, that's
Just
a
like
whole that's a whole conversation we could have about just sound effects in movies and stuff, like,
Oh,
all of
absolutely.
that stuff is caricature.
Mm,
When you really think about, like, the sounds that you see, I mean, think about computers that are always beeping, like, in movies it works, right? You kind of expect that, but then, like, in real life, you're like, "Oh my god, if your computer was beeping all the time, can you imagine?" Right? And one of my professors loves to say, like, "Hear a dog, see a dog," and it's so or see a dog, hear a dog, excuse me, and
mm.
and it's so true, like, every time in a movie when there's a dog on screen, you're gonna hear, like, a little panting, a little whimper, a bark, something, but, like, most of the time when you see a dog, it's just chilling, it's not making any sound, maybe panting, maybe. Anyway, just talking about heightened reality.
Yeah. It's interesting because I think for me with this project, because we're both huge film people. We love film. It's
Mhm.
like one of the things that like we talk about like all the time,
Right.
right? Which I think, and we always talk about story, and some of our favorite movies are the ones that have like just really good writing and tell a great story. And I think, like you're saying, those little things help tell the story. And I think even working on this project, there were moments where, like, I definitely think there's like a narrative of some kind being told. And I think the thing is we went through and we did all these things to it and try to get it to these specific. We did like the specific. I don't know what's the word. Like we did with the match and we did with the firework. Like, all those little things, little tiny details we did kinda help tell this story over the course of, I don't know, whatever I was feeling over a year, right?
Right.
So it's like all those little things, like spending 2 hours on that one little sound that happens like that, like, really quick, is
Mhm.
really important because it adds this level of detail and this level of, I don't know.
Right, it's like being very hyperbolic with a lot of things, but at the same time, subtle, right? And and
Yeah.
and that's a word that we use so much through all of this is subtlety, right? Like I'd
Oh, yeah.
change the volume of something by like half a dB, and we're like, oh my god, it's amazing the subtle stuff. Like, but I mean, it's true. The subtle stuff really matters.
Yeah, we did a ton of that, didn't we?
Yeah. Earlier I said that a lot of the album is just kind of like a cloud, right? When we were talking about panning
Mm,
and stuff, but I'm curious, how would you describe this album? Somebody was like, "Oh, what's
interesting.
your album? What's it about? What's your, what style maybe? I don't know. However you want to approach it." Like,
That's a good question. I've been trying to figure this out. One thing that I try to do is I try not to label things as I'm doing them
hmm,
because I feel like sometimes that'll put you in a box. And sometimes it's either a box you want to be in or you don't want to be in. So I've been actually thinking about this because I've been trying to figure that out myself. But one thing I've been saying is like I've been kind of describing it as like this electroacoustic ambient soundscape exploration. And I don't know if that's necessarily I'm trying to figure out a better way to like sum it up. But there's definitely I've been obsessed with this idea of like electroacoustic music, combining the acoustic with the electronic, which has been really fun. But at the same time, I was very much so writing just these longer, well, not longer in terms of time, but like in terms of space, these pieces that sit. This idea of just creating a space that the listener can just kind of sit in for a while, right? And just kind of sulk. And I remember what was it? We showed it to our friend Jordan, and
hmm
I think one thing he said, I think it was him or was it someone else? I think it was Jordan. I think he made a comment that like he would fall asleep to some of it, which is like that's exactly the point. A lot of people are like, "Oh, you got to write music that like, you can listen to in your car and bop your head." But it's like, what about all the other times when like you come home from work and you just sit there and you don't want any of the crazy noise. You just need something that's just that you can just a space that you can exist in. It just is created for those moments,
hmm,
which I think I was subconsciously doing that. So it's kind of like this very chill electroacoustic exploration of noise, which was fun and kind of exciting because it kind of opened up other things where on one of the tracks, Mellow Stew, in the beginning, it's just all these like percussive instruments. And there's moments where I just kind of had these sounds of the shaker like right by the ear.
hmm
And I didn't really use the shaker to make a rhythm. I just kind of would twirl the shaker a little bit to get the sounds of like the beads inside of it.
hmm
And I had these moments where I had to like look at the instruments that I had and I'm like, how can I make something out of this in maybe more of an unconventional way to kind of get what I'm trying to do? Because all this whole album was kind of made with like what I had at my disposal because of just the situation. So I don't know, I would just call it like an ambient exploration of electronics and acoustic sounds. Which still I'm trying to find a shorter way of saying it, but it's a very ambient album. I would say it's an ambient
uh-huh.
electroacoustic piece of music.
I like the long one though. Electroacoustic ambient exploration of sound. That sounds like an announcer from like the 40s. He'd be like, an electroacoustic ambient exploration of sound. you know, and
At like the beginning of Up.
yeah,
Oh
don't take
my
it the wrong way.
gosh.
Like I love it. I'm just saying. I thought that was
That's
funny.
funny. It's like being really descriptive.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's funny. It's like throughout the process, like I really wasn't trying to label what I was doing.
hmm
Which then later on, it's like, crap, now I have to label this, right? Which is kind of weird, but yeah. So hopefully people will listen to it and like fall asleep to some of it, which I think is kind of cool. In a good way, not in a bad way.
yeah, yeah.
But what would you say about it? What would you describe it as someone who didn't was someone who kind of worked on it in a different way that I did? Like, what is your relationship with it?
I mean, I keep saying cloud, right? Um, and I think for good reason because it really does. Like every piece to me feels like it's a different kind of cloud that you just, like you said, just sit in, right? Like you're referring to it more as like a space that you can sit in. But I just see it as this conglomeration of stuff, and I think it's really cool, right? Especially somebody who's really into sound design and stuff. Like it's cool to just sit there and appreciate sounds, right? You have the shakers really close to your ear and just really hearing the beads and feeling that sensation of just the physical acoustics of it is so fascinating to me. And there's just so much of that to dissect in this album because there are so many little things just scattered everywhere. It's really fun.
Yeah, it was definitely fun to make. I think that was kind of the spirit of everything. And I think even the spirit of mixing it because like you said, like there were so many moments we were just like, "Oh, it needs this." Like, "Oh, let's record a match." "Oh, let's make a firework out of the tail end of this sound that is not a firework at all."
Right.
It was almost like reimagining certain things, and it was super fun because it
Mhm.
makes you kinda look at things differently. And there are definitely moments like, "Bip," for example. That sound was I mean, that sound, you know, that piece was made all with sounds in my apartment against the advice of my professor. They said not to do that because that is a dumb idea to do because it's like that's an easy way out and it's hard and sometimes ends very badly, but I was like, "Let me just give it a shot."
Hmm.
So, a lot of it was just like, "Oh, let me, like, record the sound of me twirling my glass of sweet tea." Like, is there something there? You know what I'm saying? Is there
Yeah.
something musical happening there? Let's find out.
Uh-huh.
It's just really fun to just wonder and just try crap, which I think was kind of the whole spirit of writing this thing, and I think even mixing it because I remember when we first started, we sat down and you kinda looked at me and you're like, "Alright, what are we gonna do?" And I was just kinda like, "I don't know," on one of them. I don't remember which one it was. It was actually Bip, because that was the first one we did, and we sat down and we were just trying to figure out how to get into this thing, and we just were like, "Okay, let's just give it a shot and see what happens." Like, we kinda had to ease into it, which was really, I think, interesting.
Right. 'Cause, yeah, I mean, this is a first for both of us, right? I've never mixed an
Yeah,
album before, and you never had your album mixed before.
yeah.
So, it was cool. And then, yeah, I mean, I would ask you for every time we sat down, I'm like, "All right, like, what do you want?" Right? Because again, like, I'm in service to you at this point. What is it that you need from me?
You know what's funny? Kind of like in that idea of you're in service. It's funny because like, I almost feel for me, I almost feel the opposite. Because part of me is like, I feel like I'm in service to you.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've had this conversation before because I've had moments where I've collaborated with friends and things, and especially as someone who's writing the music, it's like, you invite your friends to play on a piece of yours, you know? It's like they are just as invested in it as you are in a different way, but like their names are on it. So throughout the process, I was like, I know I want this to be something that you're just as proud of as I am at the end of it because I feel responsible for the result of everything, right? And in a weird way, it's like if this thing sucks, right? Whatever that means, it's like I feel bad because yeah, it's my music, but it's like I want to make sure that everybody who's working on this thing is just as happy with it and it's something that they will happily go show to someone else or try to, maybe if they're trying to get a job like, "Hey, I worked on this thing. I'm really happy with it." Cuz throughout the process I was like like I want this to be something that Noah is happy with. Not only you, but also Kayla who's mastering the tracks right now. I even told her as well. I was like, "Let's get it right and where you want it so like you can look at this thing and be like, "Oh, I did that."
Hmm.
You know?
Yeah.
Which I think it's interesting that we were kind of thinking in the same way, and I think that's good.
Yeah, for sure.
I think that's really good.
I know, as much selflessness as we can add to the music industry, please.
Oh my gosh, don't get me started on that crap.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's really easy sometimes to forget. It's like, I don't know. I've just had so many experiences. I think more or less in school, like we would have, guests come in. Usually like guest composers would come in and have their works played. And it's like they've had their works played so many times. It's like they just are like, okay, whatever. I don't know. I just think when you're especially when you're like putting on a performance like a live show and you have like, oh, you have strings and stuff. It's like you want to make sure it's good because you want them to be just as proud of it as you are. Even though like, "Oh, this is my music," but it's like, you can't do it yourself, you know?
Right.
You need these other people to make it happen. So you want everyone to be happy with it, and then I think through that, you're gonna get a better product because everybody's really proud of it and is gonna give their all.
Hmm.
So I think that's really important and something I try to remember.
Alright, what's your favorite piece from the album? Terrible question, I know, but
I know, but we gotta keep this going. I'm trying to think. Ah, man. I'm gonna put this into 2 categories. One category is in terms of, like, composition, which one I'm the happiest with, and 2, just the result, which one I like,
Hmm.
if that
Okay.
makes sense.
Sure.
I think BIP, in terms of, like, composition, I really like it, I think it's cool. The process was a lot of fun, and I like the result. But in terms of, like, just like, I think Steep. I think Steep it's just fun.
Yeah.
That was a fun one to do.
Mhm. Eventually, yeah.
Yeah, it sucked at first, but I really like that one a lot. I don't know, it's just kinda nice. I just like the stuff we did on it
Mhm.
with the trumpets at the end.
Yeah, the trumpet sounded great, dude. What was your trumpet player's name again?
His name's Galen. He's a friend of mine here.
Yeah,
I
he's
met him
killer.
not long before that, and I was just like, "Hey, you wanna play trumpet?" Because I didn't have any acoustic instruments on it, and I was like, "This needs something."
So,
So I added the trumpet.
yeah, tell me about that process a little bit, like, it seems very improvised, and I think from what we talked about before, it was. But I'm wondering, like, what kind of direction did you give him? Did you have any kind of lines written out, or did you just say, "Just go for it and see what happens?"
Yeah, so that was one of the things I was trying to figure out because I was like, "Okay, this needs some kind of acoustic something." And I was like, "Trumpet would be really cool." And I was like, "Well, what if we had," and it kind of like the whole idea of the album was like just stacking sounds and making the clouds. So before he came over, I was like, "Okay, I had a general idea of what I wanted it to be." Like there was one point when the drum beat comes back in the second time. I knew like what the harmonies would be, so I had like some chords that I'm like, "Okay, I'll have him record this." But then besides that, we're just gonna go in, throw some reverb on the mic, and say, "Okay, here's the feeling that we want. Go ahead, do an improv over top of that, and then we'll stack the improv, and then we'll just see what the result is." Which, when it comes to some things, I like doing that. I don't like writing too much down because, again, you never know what's gonna happen within that time of recording. So it like leaves you open to just being like, "Oh crap, that's really cool. Wait, do that again." Or actually do that again, but change this. So I had like a general idea what it was. I knew where all the trumpets would be. I knew that we were gonna stack the trumpets. And we just kind of talked about feel and emotion. And then from there he just kind of went for it, which
Hmm.
was really exciting because I didn't know what it would sound like at the end, and it was sounding pretty cool.
Yeah, he is killer, man. He
Yeah,
had
it's
some great
he's a really
ideas, and he
he's great.
sounded amazing. Huh, that's really cool.
He's really great.
It's interesting to me as well as more of a theory nerd perspective, about this album is I feel like it's a very good blend of traditionalism and contemporary ideas, right?
Mm.
Because, I mean, obviously, you're studying composition, you're getting plenty of contemporary, whatever that means,
Yeah, what
education,
it means
right?
something different to everybody, it's kinda
Right.
crazy.
Yeah, and I feel like the theme of a lot of contemporary new music has been finding new sounds.
Yeah.
That's kind of the vibe I've been getting from it. But I mean, for Steve, right? The bass line is very straightforward.
Mhm.
I mean, Laredo, right? Like,
It's
come
very
on,
basic and
right? But
yeah.
then you have this cluster of trumpet stuff. 30 seconds later, it's like, whoa, okay, that's different, and it
Yeah.
sounds awesome. But even then, a lot of those lines within that, even though it's very clustery and stuff, the lines themselves on an individual level are very kind of traditional, right? There are a lot of stepwise motion, and it's really pretty, right?
Mm.
And then at the end of one, there's the melodicas. You had this cluster of melodicas, and I remember asking you, like, "What are you going for here?" And you said you just wanted a diatonic cluster,
Yeah,
right? And
a chaotic diatonic cluster. Those are
right,
so fun.
which, like, okay, it's a cluster, so that's contemporary. Diatonic,
Yeah.
traditionalism, right? It's like constantly you're blending these kind of theoretical ideas, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's always fun. That's the thing, I think studying music is fun, and I know you can relate to this because you hear the extremes of absolutely everything. Like,
Yeah.
I remember when I went to school, dude, there was music that I didn't even know existed.
Mm,
Just like the craziest crap you could ever think of. Like everything from like straight up like actual avant-garde, stuff,
mhm.
which sometimes what people think is avant-garde isn't because I'm just like, that's not avant-garde. You want to hear some crazy crap.
That's the
Let me tell
thing.
you something.
Oh my god, dude, avant-garde doesn't mean anything anymore.
Oh, no.
Like, everything that's not 2-5-1 chord progressions is now avant-garde. It's
And
really
it's
weird, because I mean, literally everything. It's like, "Okay, wow, it's 12 tone? That's not avant-garde." Oh, you have noise music? That's not avant-garde, right? You have concerto for jet engine? That's not avant-garde, right? That's nothing. That I've seen that before, right? It's really interesting. It's like, what does avant-garde actually mean?
that's that's really interesting.
Because but then I think to some people, those things are avant-garde,
Yeah.
right? And it could be as simple as listening to Steve Reich, and somebody would be like, "Oh, wow, that's out there," right? Even though
Yeah, it's interesting.
it's really just kinda, like, minimalistic, and a lot of it's very diatonic, but just the fact that you sit there in that space for so long, kinda like your album, right? I think to a lot of people who maybe, haven't been exposed to as much air quote abnormal music, right? Or avant-garde, whatever you want to say, right? I think those people might consider that to be avant-garde.
Yeah, isn't it weird?
Yeah, and so it's all very subjective, and I think that's a whole topic that you could dive into.
Dude, let me tell you. So, yeah, I sometimes think about that a lot. Like, especially, going to college for the first time. You experience music and things you didn't even know was a thing, and
Yeah.
you're like, "What in the world is this?"
Mhm.
It's like you have 2 experiences. One is like, you're like, "What is this? What is this?" And the other experience is like, "Oh my gosh, what is this?" You know what I
Yep.
mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
You know what I'm talking about? So
Uh-huh.
it's weird. So I remember, like, there's so many moments where you hear stuff and you're like, "Holy crap, that's really cool." But then there's some stuff here that you're just like, that someone, uh, I would say more on the academic side of music, more academic music that's written in terms of like to be more studied
That's a really
sometimes.
interesting way to put it. Yeah.
'Cause that's how I think it. There's a lot of music that is very, very contemporary that as someone who likes to write would go, would never write something like that because why?
It's interesting academic versus well, I don't know, what would that be juxtaposed to
I could I don't know.
versus
I think of it like this. I don't know. I definitely think there's music that is written for musicians, I
hmm,
think, and written for artists
yeah.
because because I know for me there's some music. I remember I had an experience when I got to school. I'd be writing music and stuff, and there'd be things like, "Oh, this is cool," and then nobody's impressed by it because they've already heard it.
Hmm.
And it's not that it's bad, you know? And the thing is, I know there's many moments that I'm like I hear that and I'm like, "Oh, that's really sweet," but I can relate it to this, 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 and this. This was more or less in my undergrad, just where I was. It was kinda weird. But yeah, there's definitely this music that is almost written for, like, to be studied, and it's almost like the function of it. It's not necessarily about the resulting sound.
Hmm.
It was about, like, the process in which it was written
Right.
or, like, the score, how it looks, which
Right.
is great. All that stuff, there's a lot in there you can take away, but it's like kind of back what we were saying, it's like you experience everything, experience the really crazy stuff, and then you experience, like, the really basic stuff that, like, everybody has heard. So it's like there's a lot of really crazy things and ideas and functions and stuff that I really like, but it's like, how do I make that's palatable for just anybody?
Huh.
And I
You know,
think that's one thing that I think about. It's like I like aleatoric stuff, but it's like, how can I do that in a way that's like would be interesting for someone who doesn't know anything about I shouldn't say doesn't know anything about music, but is a bit more unfamiliar with, you know, these styles of music and these ideas
hmm.
that we know about because we literally have just been eating and breathing this stuff for a while now.
It's interesting you made the comment that people or you'd show people your music and you'd be really excited about it and they'd say they already heard this before. I think that's fascinating because you can point to plenty of things that people get excited about and be like, "Well, you've heard that before, right?" I mean, even artists that we love, like John Williams, right? And his scores are phenomenal, but you've heard it before in Holst. You've heard it before in Wagner, right? You've heard a lot of this stuff before already. Some things are pretty directly ripped off in some ways, right? And that goes into the whole discussion about the best artists are the ones that can copy things, or a lot of pop music, right? Is the classic, you know, 251, 4 6
Yeah.
2 5 1, whatever, right? Like the same four chords all the time. And yet there are a lot of songs that come out that get really popular, right?
Yeah.
And plenty that I enjoy that are really good. It doesn't mean we haven't heard that crap before, right? And,
Absolutely.
and so it's really interesting to me because okay, what makes one pop song work as opposed to another pop song?
Yeah, that's a good point.
And that kind of stuff could apply to story structures as well. Because a lot of stories follow the same kind of structure. Like there's the whole concept of the hero's journey, right? And one story could follow the hero's journey to a T, and then another one could do the same thing, but one of them works better. Why is that?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think one it's funny because we talk about this a lot. It's like we've got especially in movies, we've gotten to a point where everything's very formulaic.
Mm-hmm.
And we're getting to a point where it's like, okay, I need something different now. It's like I've seen this played over and over and over again. Let's take this formula and just change a number and see what would happen.
Hmm.
And which is kind of cool because it's like I think it kind of goes back to this idea of there's always like a spectrum of things that are very familiar and things that are just out there, kind of a bit more unexplored territory. It's like if you take a little bit of what's familiar and a little bit of what isn't nearly as familiar and you kind of mash them together, it's kind of like it's interesting. It's like within that space of
Right.
combining these two things,
Huh.
you get like something that's new because it's like you're taking something that has already happened before, right? And you're like, "Oh, I really like that thing that this artist did or this person did. How can I do that but my way?" You know?
It's as if there's like some sort of an uncanny valley in terms of that kind of a thing. Are you familiar
Yeah.
with the uncanny valley?
No, let's explain.
So the uncanny valley is this concept that when you're trying to make something look realistic, I guess, there's a point at which, it's unrealistic enough that like you can tell it's unrealistic.
Mm.
Then there's a point where it's realistic enough where you can tell it's real. But there's a space in between called the uncanny valley where something looks pretty realistic, but you can tell something's off about it and it becomes kind of creepy actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really creepy stuff, right? Like CGI people a lot of times
Yeah.
are classic victims of the uncanny valley because it's like the CGI just isn't quite there, and it's like, oh, that's weird, right?
Isn't that weird?
And so then I wonder if we can apply that concept then to music and to storytelling and to whatever else and say, okay, there's a point where you can follow the traditional story structure and it works. And,
Yeah.
and then there's a point where you don't follow it and it doesn't work. And then there's something in between where you follow it and maybe you try to subvert expectations or you do something in between and it's just like, nah, something's off.
Yeah, it's weird. It's hard. Like, it's hard to figure it out. I think, um I don't wanna name any specific movies because I know that I think you might know what I'm thinking about
Yeah.
in terms of what movie I would say
Right,
did
right.
this horribly.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the Uncanny Valley is it's a weird place to be in because, like, with the CG people,
Mhm.
it's like the Uncanny Valley can be on purpose or it can be on accident, you know what I
Right.
mean?
That's
It's
true
like
too.
it's like, how do you get it to where you're like, "I'm going to the Uncanny Valley, and it's gonna work,"
Hmm.
right? And again, I think it's taken what is familiar and what isn't as familiar because in a way you're creating something that is I would almost say a bit more unfamiliar, which is kind of the Uncanny Valley. It's like, "Oh, I recognize this, but I'm confused,"
Hmm.
you know? But
Yeah.
for whatever reason, I like it, and it's cool, and it's kinda fresh, even though there's things in here that are been done over and over and over again. You
Mhm.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I don't know. That's a yeah. That's the thing about, like, movies and stuff. The movies that do that are the best ones
Hmm.
because it's just interesting. You're like, "How in the world did they pull that off?"
Hmm.
And music that does that too is also really exciting.
Yeah.
It's just getting to the point where you do it on purpose.
So, BIP is out there for the world to hear.
It is.
Be in peace. Where are you going from here, Grayson Jarvis?
You mean where are we going from here?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
true.
because yeah, you're stuck with me now, so is Kayla. Y'all
Yeah.
2 I've told her, like, yeah, I told her, like, at undergrad, I told her, I said, "Kayla, you know we're gonna be working together in the future. Like, you're stuck with me now. This is it. But I was thinking about this today. This album was kind of written with the spirit of just like writing songs. I used to do this thing where I was like, "Oh, I'm gonna write an album," and then it would never get written because it's kind of a scary thought. It's like you're looking at the mountain before you start to climb it,
Hmm,
and you're like imagining like it's just weird. So I just kind of would just write songs over the course of a year without even the idea of them being on an album. And then before you know it, you have these songs that kind of work. So right now I'm just kind of working on some stuff. I've sent you some stuff so you can start thinking about it when
right.
it's time. So hopefully here in the next, I don't know, year or so, we'll have another one that we can put out there. Something that's a little bit different, something a little bit more, have a little bit more acoustic instruments in this one. Should be fun. We're just gonna keep writing and having fun. That's it. That's what we're doing.
Well, man, congratulations on putting out your first album.
Thank you, and you
It's
too, because
yes, thank you for letting me be a part of this, man. It's
dude,
been so
100%. It
fun.
was so much fun. It was so much fun. And working with you and Kayla has been so awesome
Mhm.
because you both, it's fun watching you guys be excited about it, which makes me really happy because that just means that I think there's some cool stuff here
Hmm.
that I can't take all the credit for. I can't because there's so much that y'all have added to it that has made this thing way better than I thought it would be.
Hmm.
So,
Appreciate
yeah,
that.
check it out. Be in peace. Should be fun.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, until next time.
Until what? Season 2?
Yeah, season 2. One
Season 2.
episode per
One
season.
episode a season.
All right.
Season 2. Let's get
Thanks.
it.
Yeah, season 1 complete.
Absolutely.